All right, so we left off with the idea of being able to create private and public functions and attributes. So here we created, and remember a lot of these are this weird double underscore, tells us what we're going to do. And you start to see a lot of that when we look at different methodologies inside of these objects. So here we have talk, here we have a private method, and again, hey, there's our double underscore. So in this particular program we went through, we still have the same thing. We have a constructor up here, and we pass in self, name, and mood. So here we've passed in Poochie, we've passed in happy. And so when we run this, our crit talk should run this method within that object and say, hey, I am whoever, and I feel, in this case, happy. But since we know finals are coming in, well, that's maybe a better word. I don't remember. I saved it somewhere odd, so I just grabbed the one out of the book, honestly, really quickly. So, yeah, I think I deleted. So I'm a little ahead because we finished this one up, or we're getting to the end of that one. So we're on page 235, 236. We're talking about how to access those private methods. So this one, if we run it, yes, I want to save it. And it pops up and says, hey, a new critter's been born. That's our constructor. Here is our crit talk that says, I'm Poochie right now. I feel stressed, depressed, and blank. And then the public method. So what is interesting here is we have two different methods that are going to run here. So this is a public method. This is a private method. So we have the ability to run either in private, so in other words, it's available only inside this object, or we can do a public. So public methods. So when I call public methods, so notice what happens here. So I call public method, and it even says, let me bring that back over, this is a public method. And then it calls, from inside of itself, it calls a private method. So notice how that works. So let's see what happens if I try, instead of public, I try to do the if I can spell it right. Oh, I already had method in there. That's handy. All right. If I try to just run it this way, let's see what happens. And it's going to give me an error, and not just because I'm not typing, but we don't have any way to access that directly. But we can from inside of there. So we can transfer from one method inside of a function inside of another. So on page 237, we have a couple of things at the bottom of the page. And that's kind of that, here we should highlight this because these will be a good question for a final, is when do we use a private method and when do we use a public method would be a good thing in here. So there is a list. Any of those hints when you start looking through the book are a great thing to kind of underscore, highlight, and take a look at those. So we're going to look at a couple more really quickly. And we're going to look at this, finally, this critter software that you're actually going to modify for your assignment then this week. So we're going to create another critter. So we're going to call this one then, we're going to call this one property. So private method, public method. So we've got a few pieces in here. So now we're going to expand again and look at some other things that this can do. Oh, I need a new file. Close. See how many of these windows I can get open to drive everybody crazy. I am going to create a new one, but I'm going to use some of the things that we've already done. So this one we're going to look at a new piece, and we're going to look at how we can change some properties within here. So I'm going to call this one property. And again, making sure you have your name on there. Anything we do just to make it handy. And so we're going to grab some of our previous content just because it's handy and we have it available. So we're creating a critter very, very similar to what we had before. And now we're gonna put some properties so we can do a couple of things in here. And so back out here at this indent level. And so one of the things I noticed, just as a sidebar, when I'm grading through last week's material where you broke things into functions, is we still have a lot of people confused about where they need to indent. So if I want to indent for this class, I'm one indent level here, and that shows me that I am inside this class and creating a block of code. If I come back out to this outer level, I'm no longer at this class. I've started a new chunk of code. And so you do need to be careful about where we do these. So I'm going to do an app property. And I'm going to define name. And I'm going to do that here really quickly and return. So when I call the method name, it's going to return self dot underscore name. All right. So we have a couple of other things we need in here. So I'm going to grab from our old code. I'm also going to return my talk function. So the same one we've used before. All that does is get it to say something. But I'm going to add a new piece in here. And I'm going to call this one name.setter. And we're going to see if we can change properties inside of an existing object. So if new name is equal to blank, print a name can't be blank. Colon there. All right. Else self dot underscore name is equal to new underscore name. We've changed our name. All right, so what we're doing here is we've got our constructor again. We've got a name function we've created here that passes its own name back out under self underscore name. So here we can use that then, and now we're assigning it the value of a new name that we're going to pass in out of our function. So now our class is getting a little more complicated. We've got some more items in there. So I need to create a critter. So we can call it crit1. So we call our class. And I think we were up to F for fawn. Now we need a G name. Here, we'll do it this way. Garwick. So I'm just going to pass that in, and I'm going to do crit1.talk. And I want to make sure that at this point, okay, and I want to save it as property. Nope, already exists. So. And so when I run this, well, that works. It says a new critter's been born. My crit talk function, though, didn't seem to work. Did we notice that? So when I called this, I seem to have an issue. What's the issue with my code? Does anybody see it? So it's one of those simple errors. Because I'm addressing a... I just put them in there. But it also didn't give me an error for that, which is interesting. Do you notice? So now it says, hi, I'm Griffin. And all because I missed putting in those parentheses. So we have to be careful. And it looks, when you look at it, unless you realize that, it doesn't look wrong, but it doesn't error, and it doesn't give us an error code. Now, had I have more statements below that, it probably would have. But we don't always even get error codes, which is always nice. So let's see what we can do if we can change a name in here. So I'm going to crit1 dot, we're going to call the name function, and we're going to assign it then a value. Because we want to see if we can change its value to Horence. And see what will happen. So we changed it to Horence. Obviously, if we got it to talk once, we can get it to talk again. So we're going to call that same crit function and see if we can get this to work. So now a new critter was born, got it. It says, hi, I'm Griffin. We have changed your name. Hi, I'm Horence. So we can actually use that to go in and change properties inside of an object. Well, why would we ever want to change an object? So say we're human resources and we're building a program about people. Why would we ever need to change their name? Can people change their names? Yeah. In fact, what's the most common reason we change names for people? You get married. Or you're adopted. That certainly happens. So there's things that we do change. Men get that easy in the whole marriage thing. They don't have to change their name or... So, let's see, there's my file. So, we can also try that, and we can see what happens if I did just a blank string. All right, let's try that and see what happens. So this is where that... So it says, hi, I'm Griffin. A name can't be blank, because we did actually check for that. And we said, much like in database, you said I can't have an empty cell. Now we're saying you can't have an empty name, and we want a name value. So what we want to do now is we want to put all of these pieces together, and we're going to create a critter that takes in information that we can play with and experiment and try to see what's going to happen. So we're going to call this one the Critter Caretaker Program. And this is the one you're going to modify for your assignment today. And so we're going to go through how we build this guy. So a lot of this we'll be able to use. So I'm going to do File New, and I'm going to tuck this over here. I'm going to switch places with him. Chunk. And so I know I'm going to create, this is going to be my critter caretaker. And I want to make sure that this is for the assignment. And so we know there's a couple of things that we're going to have down in here. So I'm going to put in some of these sections just so I remember. So this is going to be my main. I'm going to put up here, this is where we create the objects. And so we're going to create a class. And we're going to call that class critter, much like we've done all the way through here. So because we're going to do some stuff that's very similar, or not, why is it wanting to do that? All right, apparently we want it to hang out over 2 pages. Let me close one of those, move it over here. I know that I'm going to do a couple of things. So I'm just going to quickly grab that and go, you know what? This is very similar. We know that we're going to put in some new information. So in this case, we're going to have self and name, and we're going to do a couple of other things. So we're going to set up, bless you. So we're going to set up this one to have both hunger and boredom. So it's like a college student. They're hungry and they're bored. And I'm going to set some default values. So just like we did on our functions, I'm going to set up some default values in there. So every critter when it's born has a name and a hunger and a boredom value already established. Well, I don't in this case probably want to actually announce to the world it's born. So I'm going to get rid of this piece for now. But I do like the self name, except I'm going to make it a public method. So self.name equals name. Well, I like the ability to access those with dotted notation, so I'm going to do a couple of others. Self.boredom equals boredom. Self.hunger equals hunger. All right, so I want to be able to alter some of these things. And so one of them I want to alter is I want to alter the hunger. And I know I also want to alter the boredom. So these two values up here I want to manipulate. And so we're going to create a function or a method inside of here. And we're going to call it an internal function. And we're going to call it pass time. So what we're doing here is we're modifying every time we run this method, much like as time goes on, you need that Snickers more and more every minute of the day until lunchtime. We're going to create one here that over time, every time it runs, is going to alter those. And so I'm going to do self.boredom is equal to self.boredom plus 1. And I'm also going to do self.hunger is equal to self.hunger plus 1. So every time I run this, my hunger is going to go up 1 notch, and my boredom is going to go up 1 notch. So every time I look up at the clock and another 5 minutes have passed, great, I'm now more hungry and more bored than ever. Great. That's always useful. So, couple of things there we want to do. We now need to think about open here. All right, we're going to also now want to think about the mood. So how do we deal with the mood of somebody? If you're both hungry and bored, are you in a good mood? No. And we could even add the sleepy in there. If you haven't had enough sleep, great. I'm not happy at all. So what we want to do is define some levels of unhappiness. So we're going to do this as a property. And we're going to define mood. So notice we didn't pass it in up here, but we're able to create it. If I can create a colon there, it would be helpful. All right. So we want to figure out how we can do that. So very quickly, we could just call unhappiness is equal to self.hunger plus self.boredom. So now we have a value for unhappiness. We ought to be psychologists. We can quickly do that. So we're going to use some if statements. So remember, we start at zeros and we go up. So we're going to go by 5, 10, 15, 20s, and we're going to see if we can come up with some categories. So here, if we go less than 5, so in other words, our hunger is low, our boredom is low. We're just going to use a variable, and we're going to call it we're happy. Else, we are, and we'll set that equal to m. Now, we want to put in a couple of other layers in there so we can do some ranges, and the tool we have for that are those elifs. So we can do this in a couple of different ways, and our book shows you kind of an interesting shortcut to do that. So it allows you to do a range, and so we can do a range of what was the question? Oh, just because I didn't spell it right. So interestingly, Python, we can do this range like this where we put the variable in the middle. You could also do it where you said unhappiness is greater than 5 and less than 10. So it's really just combination of an and statement. So it's a kind of a handy shortcut, and it fairly graphically will let you know what that is. So in this case, when we'd say m equals meh. And then we could do another one for LF. And then notice we could go one more higher, so you could say 11 less than or equal to unhappiness. And less than or equal to 15, 20, whatever you want to do. So now you've got kind of a range in there. And you could break it up in other objects. So we've just broken it up into 4. You could certainly do it in other groups. So now we have a way we can say our hunger or boredom are equal to some level of a mood. Oh, there we go. All right, so that range function or ability to do it, that makes sense. It kind of self-documents and says, hey, we've got that. The other piece we need then, I need to get out of this that value for m, whether we're mad, angry, agitated, whatever our words are in there. And so I need to return whatever's in M back out. So we can use the return function. So I also need then my talk function. I'm going to go down a line to make it easier. Define talk. And so I'm going to print I am and self.name. So in other words, hopefully we'll print out our name of our critter that we're creating. And I feel self.mood. So we can print out. Each time we do this, though, we're going to do something interesting. Because we think every time you ask that question or it expresses it, we'll use that pastime function here. So not only does it print that, it's going to call our internal function here called pastime. And so each time we run talk, we're going to create a little more hunger and a little more boredom. And so fairly quickly, things are going to change. So I'm going to go down here in the main really quickly. And I want to test some of that a little bit. And so we know that we're going to put our main in a function. So define main. And so now everything's indented in here. If I do that, I also need to call that at some point. And we call our main function there. So our main, we're going to get a crit name is equal to input, and we can actually ask a user. So what do you want to name your creature? And so now we created a name, and we can call crit equals crit underscore name. So in other words, we're going to pass in, we're going to get a value for crit name and an input statement, and we're going to pass it into. So at that point, we've created an entity. And so I'm going to save it just for an error checking. And I'm going to call this caretaker. And somewhere in there, I've got an invalid syntax. Oh, I put an and. Interesting. All right. So what do I want to name my creature? Mark. All right. It didn't put out, because we didn't put in that constructor, to tell me anything about it. All it did was it ran this function, and it created my critter. So we think it works up to this point. We can certainly test it and run the talk function, but right now I just wanted to check it for functionality at this point. Make sure I didn't have any mistyping errors as I'm going along here. So if I also have this pastime, I want to give it a way to be able to feed itself and change it the other direction. And so I'm going to create one called eat. And eat's going to take in self, and it's going to alter food. We're going to do the hunger with something called food, and I'm going to pass it in a preset value. So every time, so self.hunger is equal to self.hunger minus food. So in other words, every time this function runs, it's going to take away a value of 3. Now, I have a couple of problems with that, and one of the problems is I can't really deal with negative numbers, or it doesn't make any sense to have negative numbers if 0 is full. So I want to, if self.hunger is less than 0, I'm just going to set self.hunger, I'm going to set it equal to 0. So I can put in a confirmation here, and I could say print, thank you for the food. I think our book makes you burp or something odd in there. So that works, or should work, and change that. But here's where I'm going to do something a little insidious. Because I know that it takes time to eat, I'm actually going to call our self-pass time feature again every time we eat. So immediately after we eat, we're also going to pass time. Ew, interesting. So now I've got a eating function down. So I'm also going to just copy this to make life a little quicker. I'm going to paste it in. And I'm going to change this to not eat, but to play to get rid of our boredom. And so now I'm going to say fun is equal to 3 or 4 or 7, whatever I want to do. And so now it's self.boredom. So I got to make sure I make all those changes, but it's quicker to do this than rewrite the entire thing. Minus fun. And so the same logic and so if self.boredom so if we happen to go into a negative number, and there are other ways we could do that. This is just a quick, easy way to just reset it back up to 0. So when we first run this and we had a 0 and we said minus 4, then it's going to say, well, you're really at 0. You can't get any more bored than what you are now. Oh, it should, yes. Did I do that on both of them? Yeah. All right, so now we've got an object that's got a lot of details to it. He can be hungry, he can be bored, or she. So I'm now going to base my main on that idea of that menu system that we've used a lot of times before. And so if you remember back, and again I got to be at this level for that to be in that main function. So I'm going to do that choice equals none. So we have it completely blank. And so while choice does not equal 0, so in other words our exit one, we're just creating our entire thing in a while loop now. Scroll down a little bit. So I'm going to just create a really quick menu, critter caretaker. So I'm going to then create a menu, and I'm going to steal that so I don't have to retype it all really quickly. Off of another menu or off an existing one. So we have a couple of different options in here. And so this menu structure is the same as what we've done before. We just create options for each one. And so now we know we need a if choice equal to 0. And so we've used those before. We can recreate this. In fact, you could just go copy it out of one of these. And so we have choice, and that one would be usually our just print. In some source. And then we'll do an elif for choice equal to 1. I apparently can't spell elif today at all. Elif choice equals 2. And then our elif choice equals 3. So same structure we've used many, many times here. 1, 2, or 3. So the first choice then is to listen to our critter. Well, that one's pretty easy to do because all we're going to call in there is crit.talk. And so I'm going to save this. Unexpected end. Oh, I don't have a. Hang on. So elif choice equals 2. Just so it has an item in there, I'm just going to use a blank print. All right. So we don't have all those pieces in there, but I can name it Igor. Oh. Now we have something wrong with our loop, don't we? So I need to think about how I can fix that. So why is my loop just running continually? Why would my loop be running continually? Anybody got an idea? So my choice should be none, right? And while choice is not equal to 0, this should run. So none is, so it's going to, so I don't ever get an input for choice. So I do need to do that, don't I? All right, so I need to actually get an input because right now it's just looping and says, well, yep, it's still that. I don't ever have any input. So I'm going to get a choice equals input. Please enter your choice. All right. So now let's see if it works. And I still get that input. Oh, did I not save? Hang on a second. I might have done something weird. All right. Let me make sure I have it in the right place. So while choice is not equal, choice equals input. So I've done something odd here. Hang on. Please enter your choice. Did I call it the same thing somewhere in there? Maybe not. Find main. Got something odd in here. Choice equals none. I'm guessing I have something spelled wrong somewhere in a weird spot. Choice equals input. Please enter your choice. Bless you. I have to go through here real quickly. Let me do a couple more steps and then we'll go troubleshoot. So I know I'm going to also want an else, and so that else is always my cleanup. So you entered a choice that isn't valid. And you could actually echo back or mirror back what they actually did. So a lot of times we call this our cleanup or our getting rid of things. So we know our crit talk should work. This one is really pretty simple. It's really just 2 should be crit dot eat. And then this one is crit dot play. All right. So we have our 4 choices. I always want to have at the end here my input. All right. Now let's see if I can figure out what I did wrong here. So somehow in our loop we are running wild. And why are we doing that? Choice equals input. Does not equal, do I have that one backwards, which is something I tend to do? Stop. So somehow in here I've got something odd. What do you want to name your creature? Crit. Choice equals none. So somewhere in our loop here. Choice equals input. Oh. Hang on. I see what I did. I didn't, so I talked about indenting. And while I'm sitting here talking, I don't have the loop actually indented. All right. That ought to work a little better. So now that while loop isn't just this particular piece. So when I had it, the choice over here on the left, that wasn't part of the loop, so it still never had any chance to update. Please enter my choice. What have I done there? Unident does not equal. I made it mad when I re-indented here. Hang on a second. Take that one out completely for now. And I will put it back in. Do I have a what? Oh, by print. There we go. All right. I want my choice at that indent. All right. Yeah, somewhere I've got something odd in here. Oh, I see what I did. Hang on a second. Do it that way. All right. So now it says, what do you want to name your creature? So John. And so now we have, and so I should put in those prints and clean up, and so I will do that later on, but I just want to see if we can actually make this function. So number one, let's see if it actually works on our crit talk. I am John and I feel happy. But watch what happens, or should happen, as I repeatedly do that. We go from happy to mad to agitated. And now he's angry. So I can feed my critter. Let's see if that works. And I'm going to play with the critter a couple of times. And now I'm going to see if, hey, oh, I still feel angry. So we probably need to see if I'll do it like 3 or 4 times here. So there seems to be something in our logic a little off. And so one of the things I can do then, because notice it worked when I started it. So let me close out here. So when I go through here, each time it goes down. So we went from happy to meh to agitated and angry. And we added a value here of 1 each time, right? So that makes sense. We go through once and it should be a combination of 1 plus 1 or 2, and we're still happy. The second time we're 3 plus 3 or 6, and then we're down to the meh, and so you can see how we go through those. But what's happening, or what doesn't seem to happen here, is it doesn't seem to be changing this like we anticipated. So I'm going to add another line just so I can do a print. So I'm going to print so I want to see what that value is. And again, it's just for my test purposes. So we're doing it on the eat function. And so I want to feed my critter. And it says, oh, wait. Thanks for the food. We're at a -3. Okay, so that makes sense. So we're at 0 minus 3, and we haven't ran this piece here to reset it. So I'm going to move this a little bit. I'm just going to copy and paste it. And I want to make sure that that actually is changing the way that I thought it would. So I'm putting in some test prints. So here I am naming my creature. And I'm going to feed it. And we're at 0. Feeding, 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 feeding. All right, so it's staying at 0. And so now I'm like, well, okay. So the feeding part seems to work, and I can run it again, and we're at 0. So the food part works. But that mood is based on 2 conditions. So it's based on both hunger and boredom. So I also want to see if my boredom one works. So I'm going to do something very similar. I'm going to put in a print statement. I want to print self.boredom. And I want to see what they look like. So these are just statements I will take out, but I want to see and make sure that it's working as I thought. So I'm going to play with my critter and print self.boredom. So something seems odd here. Because notice when I say self.boredom, it lets me do that, but I'm not seeing anything echo on the screen, am I? So I need to check and see what I've got going on there and make sure I don't have anything really wrong with my boredom function. So I'm going to come up here, and I'm going to look at my play function here. Self and fun, all right. Self-boredom equals self-boredom minus fun. If self-boredom is less than 0, then self-boredom is equal to 0. And I wanted to print self.boredom, but I don't actually get it to print. And that's interesting. Why would I not get that to print? So I'm going to try this. I'm going to print fun and make sure that our fun is coming across there. So again, I'm going to run that. Move it over so you can see. And I want to play with my critter. So why would it not be getting to that play with my critter? So 2, let's look at it. 2 says thank you for the food. The critter never says anything. So we need to investigate. Let's see where we're at. Well, he's still happy at least. So when I call play, do I have it defined right in here? So notice that same issue I had before where I forgot to put it in parentheses. Did I get a single error? No. Which is really weird. So it says, hey, I'm going to call something. I don't know what to do with it. So now let's see what happens. So I'm going to call my Xavier, and I'm going to play with my creature. And now it's printing out a value in there. So I can listen to my critter. I'm Xavier, and I feel happy. Great. So now that we made that little change, that seems to work, and I can take out these statements. And I can take the one I've got out here out. So now we've got a critter that can do a couple of things. So he can eat, he can talk, and he can play. And so they're all based inside of there. So your challenge this week is you're going to modify this program. And you're going to modify this program in a couple of different ways. So you want to be able to modify this so you ask how much time they're going to play or how much food they're going to eat. Is there anything else on there we're having to do? I'm not logged into Blackboard right off the top of my head. But I thought there was a second piece we needed to do inside there. So, right. Okay, so you're going to change this, and so you could change this entire value structure. So you're going to have to come up with a way, so when you create this, that you can pass in different values for food and for playtime, and that you can make sure that that actually functions to change their level of unhappiness. You could even create it where you said, yes, unhappiness is equal to these two, but you could also change it based on I'm hungry. So I'm unhappy because I'm hungry or something if you would like to. So you need to make sure you can get this to function and you can see how that works. So this is just how we determine the mood. This is how we pass things back out. And then we have our eat and our talk functions. So this should be one of your more simple ones to get this to work. But make sure you spend the time to put in comments to make sure it looks pretty. I have certainly not on this one made it look very pretty. When you run this, ideally we'd put some print statements in there and clean out the top of this. Don't have any of that. Minerva. So it looks kind of ugly, and I want to make sure that those all function. So double check those. Make sure that that all works.